A very warm welcome to you all for joining us today. My name is David Hewen, and on behalf of the team at Garrett Publishing, we're so grateful you've chosen to spend some time with us and our fantastic panel tonight. We have people from all over Australia and some from New Zealand who, like me, are excited to learn more about Pope Leo XIV. We at Garrett choose to begin all our webinars and events by acknowledging the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples as First Peoples of Australia, and we acknowledge their ongoing connection to the land. I join you from the lands of the Wurundjeri people here in Naarm, now known as Melbourne. I pay my respects to their elders, both past and present, recognising their wisdom of the land and their cultural knowledge. Before we get started in earnest, there's a few administrative matters. The chat function is available for you to put any questions to our panelists tonight. Please note that only the panelists and I can see your questions. Other people cannot. We do that for privacy reasons. Many of you who join us for our webinars with Garrett Publishing expect accreditation. There is no accreditation tonight. So for all those teachers who are joining us, you don't need to put your TAPS number in or your VAT numbers or the like. It's just a free evening. We'll do our best to answer any of the questions that you might have tonight. We aim to finish at about 8 o'clock. We might run a minute or two over based on the discussion, but we're aiming for about an hour. I wish to introduce you to our panel. Father Chris Monaghan is a passionist and current president at YTU here in Melbourne, Yarra Theological Union. He will, of course, be known to many of our friends at Garrett Publishing who attend our regular webinars for his willingness to share his biblical knowledge in its richness and make it accessible to people at all levels. He's authored books on the Gospels and Paul for us at Garrett. In fact, his latest book, Perspectives, encourages us all to find fresh ways in which to view God, ourselves, one another, and the world around us. When preparing the book, little did we know that Francis sadly would pass, and perhaps how a new Pope offers us a fresh perspective on our faith journey and our relationship with our Lord. Father Peter Jones is currently the Provincial of the Augustinian Order in Australasia. Peter has a long association with the Augustinians since his childhood. He was baptised by an Augustinian priest and educated at St Augustine's at college in Brookvale, New South Wales. In the early 80s, he travelled to Rome for 3 years of theological studies. It was there he met a young man by the name of Robert for the first time. Peter returned to Australia and was ordained a priest in 1987. He taught at his old school and was chaplain at St Augustine's in Brookvale and was chaplain at Villanova College in Brisbane. He travelled to the United States where he completed a course in formation and ministered in the formation and spiritually in Greystanes, New South Wales. And he is currently the Augustinian Provincial here in Australia and actually Oceania and Australia. Brother Marc O'Connor is Vicar for Communications for the Diocese of Parramatta, a Marist brother from the Star of the Sea province, a member of the Marist Association, and the Pope Fellow at Newman College, University of Melbourne. As editor of Catholic Outlook, the official publication of the Diocese of Parramatta, Brother Marc has written extensively about the Vatican and was in Rome for Pope Francis's funeral and the subsequent papal conflict. Father Peter, Father Chris, Brother Marc, thanks for your time and sharing your insights with us tonight. Over to you, Chris.
Yeah, thank you, David. It's lovely to be with you. It's a bit of a change for me not to be able to focus on the scriptures, but I'm sure I'll try my best not to bring it into our conversations tonight. It's really exciting for us to be here because all of us we love Francis, and now we have Leo, and otherwise known to many as with great affection as Father Bob. And it's a beautiful opportunity for us to talk to people who know him and have met him. So just as we begin tonight, will be an opportunity to learn too also about the Augustinian spirituality that has shaped him, and we can talk about the things that we can expect from him from his past experience as bishop and prior general of the Augustinians. But just to begin with our own prayer, we know that when he came to the balcony and had his initial address, he spoke to us of peace, and we'll just share the peace prayer that we know of as being attributed to St. Francis, but we're not so sure that that's actually that he in fact wrote that, but we know that it's there, and that's what we'd like to share. So can you see that at this stage, or I've got something else? I'll just make sure. I'll just come back to that. Get that particular. All right, here we go. All right, here you go. So thank you, Peter, if you'd read that for us.
Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. Where there is sadness, joy. O Divine Master, grant that I might not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive, it is in pardoning that we are pardoned, and it is in dying that we are born to eternal life.
So let's all pray for Pope Leo as he begins his ministry in these years with that desire for peace that our world so desperately needs. And let's be people of pardon and hope, light and joy. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
So many people have been looking up on the internet part of Leo's story. So I thought just to put a précis that there might be just helpful, so that everybody has a sense of the person that we're celebrating this evening. So even this particular photo here, you can see the joy and openness of spirit that's there, and that's come through many people who have reflected on the person that they've encountered. Most of them have encountered him as Father Bob, but now as Pope Leo. So he grew up in Chicago, and you can see it's a fairly humble dwelling, and there with his brothers, his two brothers there, he's the one on the left in the photo that you can see there as a young child. Just recently, the house had been on sale, and someone was trying to, once he became Pope, they took the house off the market, looking to get more profit from it. As not surprising that these are the sorts of things that happen in life. But you can see humble beginnings from a family of mixed ethnicity, growing up in Chicago, and I'm sure bring that cultural richness as something that it should not then surprise us then when he began his initial addresses to us. He was speaking in Spanish and Italian, and then ultimately in English, because that reflects his ministry and also his upbringing. So as a young man, he went to Villanova University. So as far as I can work out, Villanova University is the only Augustinian university. Is that right, Peter? Or is it the only one in the States?
It's the only one in the States, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So as you can see, a beautiful campus. He was studying there mathematics and some philosophy also while he was there in the junior as well. So after that, he went to CTU in Chicago, Catholic Theological Union, the Graduate School in Theology and Ministry. So it's close to our Passionist heart, because like YTU in Australia, in Melbourne, where we've got a number of religious orders have joined together their resources, so too in Chicago, that had happened earlier, and a number of religious orders bought a hotel, and different orders on different floors, and gradually over the years, Catholic Theological Union developed and expanded to the college that it is today. So he did his theological studies there. And then he went to the Angelicum in Rome, where he did a canon law licentiate and doctorate, and his doctoral thesis on the role of the local prior in the order of St. Augustine. So we might come back to that later on. You can see a photo there when he's studying in the time of John Paul II, and so unbeknownst to me, Peter, yourself, I was in Rome 82 to 86 at the Biblicum, doing my licentiate in Scripture, and you were doing your seminary studies, and Bob, as he was then, was doing his licentiate and studying for his doctorate. So from 1985 to 1999, he was involved in his mission in Peru. So in Trujillo, in Peru, he was a director for the Joint Formation Project for Augustinian candidates from the vicariates of Chulucanas and Iquitos and Opurimac, and then prior of the community, a formation director, judicial vicar in Trujillo. It was a professor of canon law, patristics, moral theology, and pastor of Our Lady, Mother of the Church, church before it became a parish, and later on parish administrator for Our Lady of Montserrat from 1992 to 1999. So you can see in that time of the mission extraordinary richness of experience there. So Peter, during that time, did you have much contact with him at all? Or?
And just like correction, in the early 90s, he actually became elected as Provincial of Chicago.
Okay, sure. Yeah.
But to answer your question, in terms of personal experience, that early period in Rome, but then I didn't meet him again until he was Prior General and would visit our province.
Okay.
But there were several visits during that time, so that was a reacquaintance in that period.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. So that brings us to his time as Provincial and Prior General. So you can see him in various contexts. So one was, I think, in Nigeria, the Philippines, on the right-hand side. He's there with some, those of you who know Irish culture would see that there's hurling sticks there. So this is the college at Wexford, and he visited there. Those of you who know him well would know that he's pretty keen on sports. Some people have uncovered photos of him at gridiron or American football games, and actually just in the last week when they had the Giro d'Italia, the cycling tour, the tour finished up going through Rome and spent 5 minutes with him, and then he blessed them on their way. And he said Sinner, the tennis player, come and visit him there in the Vatican offices as well. And the bottom right-hand photo, we've got him there when he did one of the visitations as Prior General to Australia. So you would have been there for that, Peter?
Yes.
Yeah. So what beach was that?
That's Coleroy Beach. It was the week following World Youth Day. There was an Augustinian youth encounter for Augustinian youth who'd come from various parts of the world. And Fr Robert, as he was then, celebrated a mass for everyone there at Coleroy Beach.
Okay, so not far from your place there at Brookvale then?
No, very close.
Yeah, okay, great. So there's a quote there about Augustinian spirituality. Would you just read that for us? And because you know who's that quote from as well.
Augustinian spirituality is founded on these words of St. Augustine: a single heart, a single soul oriented toward God, that is to say, toward unity. That's why you can sum it up in 4 words. I'd say community, interiority, charity, and obedience. And Lizardo Estrada, who's quoted there, he is now a bishop himself in Peru.
Okay. So in his time as Bishop of Chiclayo in Peru from 2015, for those years, he was the second Vice President of the Peruvian Episcopal Conference in 2018, President for the Commission for Culture and Education, appointed to the Congregation for Clergy in 2019, for the Congregation of Bishops in 2020, and Apostolic Administrator of Kala'o Diocese in 2020. You can see him there at that time as a bishop. There was great flooding during that period in Peru, and people remember him getting his gumboots on and walking around through the mud and going around with a white pickup truck to deliver food and blankets and aid to people. So that tells us something of his character very, very strongly, I would say. So then in the time of his ministry in Rome, Prefect of the Dicastery of Bishops from January 2023, President of the Pontifical Commission for Latin America, then he was promoted to the rank of Archbishop, made Cardinal in September 2023, a member of the Dicasteries for Evangelization, Eastern Churches, for the Clergy, Institutes of Consecrated Life, Culture and Education, Legislative Texts, and the Commission for the Vatican City State. So one gets a feeling that he was very, very much trusted by Pope Francis, and to think that he was made the president of the Commission for Latin America tells us the great esteem in which he was held. Because you wouldn't imagine Francis being giving that position to just anybody. But you can see perhaps part of Francis's so much trust there that he's making sure many people got to see him and know him. And Marc, I'm sure you'll be able to talk about some of how well known he was in the Curia as well. So of course we had the Synod on Synodality, and you've got Susan Pascoe was there. You've got her in the middle of the two women on the table there, and you can see him just behind in the back there. So interesting. I just asked Susan, who couldn't be with us tonight, for a little reflection on her experience of being on the table with him during the Synod. So as she said, as it happens, Cardinal Prevost was assigned to both my table groups last October. He was personable, unassuming, smart, relational, persuasive when he wanted to make a point, never domineering, a good contributor who made space for others. He was very hardworking and often sought out by those wanting to get a message through to the prefect for the Dicastery of Bishops. So I'd say that's high praise indeed. So I'll just stop that sharing for now and then come back to you there, Peter, in terms of, so you've known him since 1983. So would you just tell us some of the story of your relationship, and then we'll come to different elements like at the time, those 12 years as Prior General. But just for now, some of your story there. Thank you.
And just as a preface, in a sense, I represent my brothers and also the people entrusted to our ministries, many of whom have come to know Robert personally. So while this is, I'm sharing my experience, it mirrors what happens in the life of many in the order and those we care for. Robert, my experience of him in those earliest years was a great experience. Two of us arrived from Australia, not knowing the language, the Italian language, and coming to a new country. And two of them, one of whom was Robert, young American student priest, who in a sense were put in charge of us to help orient us on the way. That was the beginning of several experiences of his kindness, his care for others. In many ways, that young group of student priests were looked up to by those of us who are in the seminary situation. And my experience of him is that warmth, that care for other people, care for others, and just genuine human concern has been consistent all the way along.
Yeah, I mean, that's a tremendous thing to be able to say about anybody, isn't it? Yeah, tremendous. And just while we're at it, so Marc, welcome. Could you just say how you came to meet him and your connections of recent times?
Well, I first met Cardinal Prevost in 2023 when I organised a dinner for Australians and other people who were in Rome at the Synod, people who've been connected with the Helder Camara lecture series that I've organised since 1985. And so Bishop Shane McKinley was there, and Cardinal Joe Tobin, the former Superior General of the Redemptorists, and Gerald O'Connell, the Vatican journalist for America Magazine, the Irish man who was a close friend of Pope Francis. Various other journalists, Chris White from NCR, Chris Lamb from The Tablet, and a whole range of Susan Pascoe, Chiara Porro, the American ambassador at the time to the Vatican, a whole range of people. So, you know, it was over 2 or 3 hours, and he was there. In fact, he was a bit embarrassed at the end of the dinner because he said, "I'm the last one to leave. That's a bad sign," etc. So, but you're right. He was a very quiet, gentle presence, listening to people. And then in 2024, I had an interview with him for an hour. I invited him to come to Australia to deliver a Helder Camara lecture. He kind of said, maybe, you know, and then he said, come and see me again. So in Easter time, April 15th this year, it was in Rome, and I spent an hour with him, and we had a wide-ranging discussion about the state of the church and the state of the US politics, and J.D. Vance and his imminent visit to try to get to see the Pope. And so it was sort of thing. And then later on, a few days later, I was mentioning to a few people that I know in the Roman Curia that I'd seen Cardinal Prevost, and they said, kind of more or less, watch out for that guy. He said, you know, he's only been here in Rome a couple of years, but, you know, he seems to have a winning way. I know he's been there before in the Augustinian prior general role, but he'd been making a big impression. And in fact, one Irish bishop who works in the Curia said to me, you know, he could be Pope. So I was saying that to people, you know, including Chris Lamb and Chris White from the, you know, other Vatican journalists, and they were saying, yeah, it's possible. And most people said, no, he's an American, you know, he won't have a chance, etc. But he's not a typical American in that sense. He's a man, as you've heard, with great pastoral experience and experience of governance. So, yeah, you know, so I was very enthusiastic about him, and I kept on saying to people, you know, I think he might get to be Pope, you know. And Cardinal Oscar Rodriguez, Salesian, who wasn't an elector, but whom I know quite well, you know, we had a meal the night before the Pope's funeral, and he was telling me, you know, there's an Italian push to get Parolin elected, but the Latin American cardinals love Bob Prevost, you know, because they see him as one of them. So, you know, I wouldn't claim anything like the familiarity that Peter has with him, but I get a pretty good sense, and I spoke to an awful lot of people in those 3 weeks I was there about him, and I think it's when he was elected, I was ecstatic. I thought, this is the right man for the right, you know, not a photocopy of Pope Francis, but a man with the same style, vision, rather, and perhaps a slightly different style, rather.
Yes, I think so, because my experience from some of my Italian brothers would say that Pope Francis, you know, obviously had an ongoing challenge with the Curia. And sometimes I don't know if any of our audience have read some of Francis's Christmas greetings to the Curia. It's worth having a look at, because he didn't pull any punches with them. And
one famous quote was where Francis said to them, trying to reform the Curia is like trying to clean the Sphinx with a toothbrush. You know,
I could imagine
that led to a certain amount of not joy, but consternation amongst about the Roman Curia. You know, he had a lot of people who were, you know, I don't think he ever completely trusted the whole system, and that's why he partly stayed to some degree, you know, at Santa Marta, and he didn't allow gatekeepers to control who could get in to see him. I think Leo XIV is perhaps a more kind of considered man. You know, I was very interested that when John Paul II came out on the balcony, he spoke spontaneously after his election. The same with Cardinal Ratzinger, you know, Pope Benedict. and certainly with Pope Francis. But when Leo appeared on the balcony, he read from a text. You know, he'd written something. It was handwritten, apparently, I'm told. He's kind of considered in what he has to say. So he's probably quite different from Francis, who gave spontaneous media interviews and sometimes put his foot in it and sometimes issued harsh prophetic truths. I think, you know, it's a different style, but, you know, I don't think the vision is entirely, you know, very different at all.
No, I think that's true. One of his advisors when he was Prior General, he's from. Do you know Luciano de Michaelis? Yeah. So he said of him, he's a man of great balance as an expert in both canon law and the Church Fathers, which allows him to approach issues from a variety of angles. He's also at heart a missionary. He often told us how much Latin America taught him. And I think he's very much declared that he wants to be a figure of unity in the Church, and consistent with the message of Vatican II. And we can see with the whole thing about press for synodality, these are areas that he will continue. And I think that's where many people were very encouraged by that. Look, someone has already asked a question that I'd like to explore with you, Peter. Just to give us a bit more understanding about the Augustinian tradition and how that will have shaped Pope Leo in terms of his values, lifestyle. As an initial question, see what you'd have to contribute to that. Because as a friar, I mean, that's interesting. From Villanova, you hear that he became where he studied. What Villanova was a Spanish Augustinian, who great for his concern for the poor, and apparently that all his life he bore the same habit which he kept on repairing himself. So that's intriguing to hear. I wonder what the rest of the community thought about that, but I'm sure they had different view about that. But could you just say a little bit to tell us what the family that he's come from, really? Yeah.
Yes. Many years ago, one of our great Augustine scholars of the past, Father Tarcisius van Babel, Belgian, used the image in terms of describing charism as a window on the gospel. So all those qualities belong to all of us. However, certain traditions look at the gospel through a particular lens. So the Augustinian lens particularly places an emphasis on the quality of human relationships. A stronger word than community is communion. So that degree of love, forgiveness, friendship. So that's an important emphasis, which comes from the life and teaching of Augustine himself. But our order tries to be faithful to that. Another is, we often use the word interiority, but it just means that deep sense of the Lord's inner presence in our lives, and that we're on a common journey and we support one another, but that deep interior presence. Our hearts are restless, Lord, until they rest in you. Okay. And the final thing I'd like to emphasize is the commitment and love for the church and for the world is motivated by love. Service is not taken on as a glory in itself, but because it comes out of love, which is God's grace to us. So all of these are deeply embedded in the person of Pope Leo, our brother Robert. He, right when he spoke at the balcony on the first presentation after he was elected as Pope, talked about building bridges, about dialogue. And these are not just abstract concepts. He related them to the stress of conflict in the world, which the violence of which is sadly too plain to see at the present time. So I saw a very clear link between the tradition in which he's been formed and how is he expressing himself now that he has that ministry to the whole church.
Okay. Look, there is one question that we already received about how does it feel for you as an Augustinian to have one of your own to be the Pope?
Okay, so I think I speak for many of my brothers. Shock was the first reaction, but it wasn't shock in terms of his qualities, because everything Marc said was true in terms of his the qualities which he brings now to that ministry. It's just we didn't expect it.
Yeah.
And so it's a wonderful gift. But when I say that, we are obviously joyous and grateful and thankful for it. But it's also a big challenge because the obligation on us to live faithfully according to the values he's going to present to the Church Universal, we've got to try and do our best to live up to that. So it's actually a moment of renewal for us as an order, in a sense, to go from that joy and that thankfulness to actually live the spirit which he is preaching and living himself as Pope.
And you never know, how these things are going to emerge. For example, I think maybe, we have to all be careful not to overthink,
Sure.
What is going to happen and what is going to emerge. We don't really, have a real sense because, it took, a few years to get even a sense of what Francis was, and, and of course he surprised the Jesuits. Unlike the joyful Augustinians, I'm told reliably by the Jesuit Cardinal of Hong Kong that on the night of the election of Pope Francis, the general Curia community right next to the St. Peter Square where they live were gathered in the TV room. And when the news came through that Cardinal Bergoglio had been elected, there was a dead silence in the room, and nobody cheered, nobody was very happy. They all left the room in total silence and went to their rooms, etc. And yet, it became very clear that, of course, he like everybody else had been on a journey, and he, they'd had certain experiences of him when he was provincial in Argentina back in the 70s and the early 80s, but he had grown, and I'm sure that's what's going to happen to, our new Pope. That he will emerge. It will emerge. He'll be different, but at the same time, I've got great confidence that he'll be. I think he was Cardinal Roche of the Congregation for Worship has said in recent days that the closest collaborator to Francis in the last 2 years was the then Cardinal Prevost. So I think he's a man who's thoroughly imbued with the values and the vision of the Latin American Church, and its pastoral strategies, since the Second Vatican Council, just as Francis grew out of that experience. But he grew, and I think, I notice some people on the left, say what are examining everything he says and looking for signs, is he going to roll things back a little bit? And then there are some people more from the conservative side who are saying, oh, well, he wore the slightly more conservative vestments and he's gone back to living in the apostolic palace and trying to read the tea leaves. I think they're kind of overthinking it. We have to trust the Spirit. The Spirit, is at work. But I feel very happy and serene about his election.
Yeah, I think that's true. Interesting that Massimo Fagioli, who's at Villanova University, he was talking about this election also sends a message to Trumpism and the US Vice President J.D. Vance. It highlights a different kind of American Catholic culture. That said, it's important to emphasize that Robert Prevost isn't a liberal Catholic, he's a social Catholic. And I think that's really interesting, isn't it? Because he's going to be a figure of unity, but as he was reminding J.D. Vance, don't talk about moral theology and Catholic principles when you don't understand them. And I think it might be worthwhile reminding people the meaning, why he chose the name Leo, because the social encyclical Rerum Novarum was there. So he also, the Leo XIII, established the Biblicum as well to deal with the modern world.
And Brother Leo was the first disciple and closest disciple of St. Francis. I'm not saying that's a major factor, but it's another. The disciple closest to St. Francis was actually Brother Leo. So there's a sort of a nice sort of touch, and I agree. I don't think those categories of liberal, progressive, conservative, whatever, are all that helpful in some ways in looking at a person of the kind of depth and interiority that Leo XIV, has. And that's why I think, he may be in a little bit of a honeymoon at the moment, because there were in the pre-conclave meetings dissenting voices, cardinals who got up, particularly those who were some non-electors, and they got up, and particularly those who were critics of Pope Francis. They were pretty, savage, actually. Cardinal Buller called the Pope Francis a dictator. Even in this week's Catholic Weekly, there's a letter from a priest criticising the Catholic Weekly for publishing too lavish a spread on Pope Francis, and I don't know why they published it, but basically saying he was a heretic. So there were strong views, but I think Prevost sort of seems to be a person that remarkably they all gathered around him pretty quickly. It was the quickest papal conclave in over a century, quicker than the election of Cardinal Ratzinger. So I think there's he's got every sign. And I did hear Cardinal Supich of Chicago give an interview where he said that remarkable thing about the then Cardinal Prevost is the way he was able to organise meetings and be able to bring in and listen to people and synthesise various viewpoints and provide a kind of a harmony, which I think sort of bodes well for his continued promotion of the concept of synodality and listening in the church to a variety of the different charisms and voices.
Yeah, and sure, and given the fact that he is a listener, and I think, Peter, you've actually highlighted something before when you were talking about interiority. Yes. He's known to be a listener, and I think that's probably a rich part of your tradition, that he doesn't speak before he's listened and considered and then responds. So I think that's an important part of it too. Could you say a little while we've got time is moving away very quickly, I must admit.
Yes.
But could you say a bit about his time as general? Because when you think there's at least 3,000 friars throughout the world,
Yes.
and 12 years of traveling the world, seeing the world church, that must be a tremendous resource that he brings to the position.
So we've been very blessed in our the recent prior generals, because they've placed great emphasis on their engagement with the communities and ministries of the order throughout the whole world. Mm-hmm. I said before, part of our shock, it meant that we were unprepared in terms of accurate information on the first day, but further research, he visited Australia 6 times as prior general.
Wow.
And perhaps one of the most significant one of those visits is the visits where he visited all the ministries in late 2005, and many of the people in the parishes and the colleges have a wonderful memory of him. So it was a ministry of prior general very much focused on other people, the welfare of all the members of the order, and the people in the various ministries. So there are many great memories of him. Some of our people who were young adults at the time of the World Youth Day and the Augustine Youth Counter have spoken on media in recent days about their direct memories of his engagement with the young people during that time. And he mixed with everyone, young, old, etc., on those visits. So very personable, and but it was very clear his genuine interest in the other person. And if I just add something, it relates to what Marc was speaking about before. He will be very serious about the communion and dialogue in the positive sense. I mean by that, by listening and being attuned. I was just thinking, he's the first Pope, if I use a popular something that means much to us in popular culture, is the first Pope younger than the Beatles, the first after World War II, born after World War II, the first who came to adulthood after the conclusion of the Second Vatican Council. And I'm just mentioning that in terms of being attuned to those things we associated or currents that emerged in the latter part of the 20th century from a more direct experience. As well as his internationality, service of the church, etc. So just, I think all those parts go to make up the person who he is.
And I think,
thank you, Peter. Yeah.
And I think one of the things, is somebody's mentioned in the chats, that he's obviously the first Pope, who is sort of modern English speaker. I think there was an English Pope once, but I don't know
Yes.
exactly what he spoke, but some form of English, I presume, but or Latin, I suppose, more likely. But yeah, but I think he's been careful not to, at least at the moment, overdo speaking in English, because I think he wants to make the point, I think, which is my opinion only, that, that he's not simply an American Pope, but that he's somebody who is speaking globally. So he's very obviously comfortable speaking in Italian and Spanish and all of that. But it is good that we have somebody now who can communicate, as somebody has pointed out. English is, the language that is spoken, around the world, and being able to speak to the English-speaking world will help in the communications thing, I think, with the media, because often, it was difficult for the English-speaking media and communications to actually get a handle on previous popes, because English was not their first language. And somebody's mentioned, what about his views on women in the church? And of course, obviously, I think all I can say to that is that from what I've heard and seen of the way he has communicated and dialogued with women in the diocese, and obviously in the Augustinian family, and then in his work in the Council of Latin America, that he's been somebody who is deeply respected and loved. What he would do, with those more burning issues about the two commissions about the ordination of women to the diaconate, I really don't know, but I think one can be pretty sure that he will be giving a thoughtful and sort of reasoned and considerate sort of response. I do know a story that Chris Lamb told me from CNN, that a close friend of Pope Francis is a Latin American woman, an Argentinian, who went to see Francis around Christmas time, and she was worried about him. And she said to him half jokingly, "Holy Father, when you go, this is a bit of a tradition about what happens to people who are close to the Pope after the Pope dies." She said to him, she's a married woman with an American husband, professor in Rome. She said to him, "Holy Father, when you go, I hope I'm a bit worried what's going to happen to me. Are they going to throw me into the Tiber? This is, like they used to do with some other close associates of previous popes in the medieval period." And he said to her, "Oh, look, don't worry." He said, the man you're working with on the Pontifical Council for Latin America, referring to Bob Prevost, he'll look after you, and you love him and he loves you, etc. So I think there is a kind of a healthy humanity about him, and I think one can sort of reasonably assert that that the kind of accompaniment model, or that is going to be his focus on the person, rather than the label, which of course was a great characteristic of Francis. That Francis didn't categorize people; he just saw the person in front of him. Hence his famous phrase, "Who am I to judge?" In that, on the way back from the Rio World Youth Day.
Thank you. So I'm aware of the fact that we've just got a couple more minutes before we go back to David there, and there's been some interesting questions there, and some of them, of course, that none of us are in a position to answer, particularly about how he's going to respond to the question of how synodality will continue to develop within the church, and also the questions of sexual abuse. And of course, these are questions for whoever would be in the position of Pope. Yeah, so it's interesting there. In many ways, we think someone's Massimo, as I was just reading about him, was saying on theology, Leo XIV has made clear that he's a Pope who will continue on the path of Vatican II. His Augustinian theology will likely influence his doctrinal policies. But an interesting question is just how he will interpret the Council today, 60 years after its conclusion, in terms of its legacy and its limits. Of course, none of us are in a position to be able to answer that, because we just have to wait and see. But what we do know is clearly that he's going to bring an open heart, a spirit of dialogue, a care for people, a concern for unity. These are great values to bring to discussions. I can remember in the time of Francis, he was talking about that virtue of paresia, of boldness. But I think sometimes, depending on what sort of climate's been established, boldness is something that people may not want to do. But I think sometimes when you create a safe environment for dialogue and discussion and discernment,
Yeah, yeah.
you'll get a long way. And I have great trust and hope that that will be precisely one of the gifts that he'll be bringing.
And I think one of the things that, I mean, every pope has his strengths and his weaknesses, and, he will have his strength and he will have his weaknesses. That was true of John Paul II, of Benedict and Francis and whatever. I mean, I think in one way he is going to be a much more formidable foe of the kind of right-wing American Catholics who dismissed Pope Francis as a Latino, as a Peronist, as somebody that, as a left-winger, too concerned with ecology, too concerned with migrants and sort of thing. They could easily dismiss him, but Prevost being one of them, coming from Chicago, and also somebody who is more considered, let's face it, there were kind of some strange inconsistencies in Francis. This is not a criticism of him. I loved him, but he had the synods on synodality, 2 sessions, and then he and the other Argentinian in the CDF there issued that statement, which I have no problems with, about, blessings of people in various, situations. But they issued it without any, in December, straight after the Synod of Synodality, without any process of synodality. They didn't consult any of the Roman congregations. They didn't consult the G9 consultative group. So, we've all got our flaws, and I think Prevost is unlikely to kind of be quite the same in the way that he approaches the synodality thing, but he will bring his gifts, etc.
No doubt. That's right. So thank you very much. A number of questions have been occurring there, and which are arising, which is great. So I'll just hand over now over to David, and to come back in and highlight some of the questions that you'd like us to explore.
Thank you very much, Chris, Peter, and Mark. Synodality has been mentioned regularly through the questions, and we've touched on it tonight. But Peter, your views on knowing Pope Leo and his views on synodality. I mean, I think there was an expectation of somebody that, he didn't mention it in his first speech, which is understandable because it's been something that's been critical to the church for 5 years now. But your thoughts on synodality? Mark's touched on it already, but just your thoughts, and also that Augustinian flavour that may come through, different from the Jesuits.
I absolutely have no doubt his synodality is, again, to use that expression, deeply embedded within him. Whether a word's used or not, to me it was very clear, building bridges, dialogue in that very first speech and intervention since. So as I just said, I have no doubt that path will continue under Pope Leo, and there's just a consonance between that Augustinian spirituality aspect of his person, which is more than words, we experience as deeply practiced in all the ways we have known him. So yes, I just don't have any fear about that not happening.
And I think it's important to say that as a religious, synodality is how we live anyway. In communal life, this is the way. No one stays in power forever. It comes and goes, and it's essentially dialogical. So really, he's just living out. He's going to live out what has been his experience of church all this time. It's what's made him a good bishop, and I think that's the thing. It's power comes and goes, but the call to reach out in love and service is what lasts, and you can see that there's clearly very, very deeply a part of who he is, and we look forward to seeing that. Really, I think.
The couple of the conversations that we've had, Peter, and also what I've read is that you know, there's the fact that he's visited Australia 6 times. Anthony Albanese has invited him. No doubt, I think I read, I might be mistaken, but I'm sure if it's not in the press, I'm sure Archbishop Fisher would have invited Pope Leo to come for the Eucharistic Congress in 2028 at the very least, if not before. What is Pope Leo's views as such on Australia? What made him laugh when he was in Australia? What sort of yeah, what was his thoughts around Australians and our fickle strangeness?
Well, as far as I know, they were positive thoughts.
Yes.
The frequency of the visits and the depth of them in the way he engaged with people showed a love of this country, which he would have displayed in the various places he visited. He's that sort of person. But somebody who doesn't remain aloof from the particular place he's in. For example, on that youth encounter that we had a walk in the Australian bushland. He very much appreciated that. One of my brothers has worked in Indigenous ministry in the Diocese of Cairns in far north Queensland. Robert visited him and showed a great interest in that aspect of my confrere's ministry and the story of Australia. They're just two brief examples, and I could give many others where he immersed himself with us on those visits.
It's interesting. Sorry, I just might say, Peter, in the chat there, you've got some people from some of your parishes going into a contest with one another to find out which is the favourite parish of his time visiting Australia. So obviously there's a sort of lottery that you can run among the Augustinian parishes in Australia, because it looks like they all like to claim themselves as the favourite parish. So that says something about the person that they want to claim him. But there's something negative about Australia, and this is what that Marc has already highlighted.
No, not negative, but
No, it's about taste. It's about
taste. He certainly sort of expressed a hesitation about Vegemite, and he was more positively inclined to another side of biscuit. That was the only thing that the media brought up, and I played that on that.
That was good.
But he definitely, just as Francis was, we've got to allow him to be himself. I'm very glad that he didn't take the name Francis II, because it would have been, I think, the comparisons would have been noticed. So somebody pointed out, synodality is the normal way we would expect authority to be exercised in the church. And that is true, but it comes with the person, it's incarnated in the person, just like, Francis was great, a listener and accompaniment, fantastic in so many ways. He was also an old-style Jesuit provincial, who ran the church like a Jesuit provincial, very big into discernment. I can remember feeling quite disappointed at the Amazon Synod after being there, and all the Amazonian bishops and cardinals all agreed on something, and then he came in and said, no, it's, we haven't, the debate's not mature enough, we have to wait. And his whole style was a little bit sort of, could be vertical, in the Jesuit style of administering everything is quite centralized, from the Jesuit sort of general cura and superior general, even to the appointment of local superiors. So I'm sure our new Pope will live out synodality, but we've got to let him unfold and, and trust him and love him, etc., to let the Spirit work through him. And I think this is a marvelous gift of the Spirit, Soon enough, the critics will come out and dissect him, and that's already happened with the MAGA Catholics in the United States. Steve Bannon has been attacking him. And it'll be interesting to see whether he can actually heal some of the polarization and divisions amongst the main opponents of Pope Francis, who were sections of the US bishops. So that's an enormous challenge. but he has this gentle, quiet presence, and I'm sure he'll live out synodality, and he will learn how to live it out too, like all of us, as he experiences it in this new role as the successor of Peter.
I was quite encouraged, Peter, when you mentioned the Indigenous thing. I think the fact that he took great interest in the Indigenous culture and spirituality probably reflects the time that he was in South America with the Indigenous peoples there. Well, that's my suspicion anyway, but it's still very, very encouraging, I think.
And this, obviously what I'm saying is not unique, but the community we lived in the 80s, it was an international community.
Yep.
And he entered in very strongly in that. He was a person who related well to everyone. So that interest in other people and the diversity, which is a great gift we have in our world, has something that has been rich in his life for a long, long time. And understanding other people.
Yeah, his whole role as, I think, as a global leader, as somebody said at the time, before that election, they were the most important. Donald Trump was the most important American in the world, etc. Now he's the second most important because Leo, in reaching out, talking about Gaza and talking about Ukraine, all of these sorts of things, he's definitely, going to be able to exercise a very positive influence in global affairs, and it'll be interesting to see how that unfolds. But I think he'll bring his own unique gifts to that role and strangely enough, or not ironically enough, he was ordained a deacon by Bishop Tom Gumbleton, the peace bishop in the United States from Detroit.
Yep.
So and he was ordained a priest by Archbishop Jadot, who was the famous nuncio in the United States, who was very much a friend of Paul VI and implementing Vatican II. So he has good pedigree.
Yeah. I did. There was a confirmed Archbishop Fisher has asked him to 2020.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
So I thought I'd read it, but sometimes
he definitely has. And as I say, he's a man who, at that dinner at Los Capones in 2023, where he met with Chiara Porro, the Australian ambassador, and the US ambassador, who was also there as well. You could see him going around talking to them, the important people, but he was also talking to the waiters and talking to just the ordinary people like myself who were just there, and he was taking them and treating them, with great dignity and respect. So I think, we shouldn't underestimate his role about being a peacemaker, because there aren't too many of them around at the moment in terms of global.
Excuse me.
And that's just one of the things that struck me too about we've got a very interesting moment in the life of the church and in the world too, because so many leaders are not leaders that we can respect or honor. And in the death of Francis, you could see that he was a world figure because he was concerned about the world and humanity. And we've got a really interesting moment now because you can see that Leo is able to do that, and he'll bring the gift of Augustinian spirituality to that dialogue there. I'm just aware we're just about done on time, David.
I know. I was just about to say, I think we need to wrap it up. We're about a minute from 8 o'clock. We could probably talk for another hour, but we won't do that. To Peter, thank you so much for your time, your insight. I'm sure there's so much more that you could give us. And I'm sure the Augustinian spirituality and the sense of that, people's interest in that will continue. Marc, thank you so much for your insights as well. And Chris, thank you very much for participating and guiding us and guiding the discussion. It's been most interesting. Lots of great questions, lots of great comments. So people are really coming through on the comments saying thank you very much. Now, a couple of things, because there's no such thing as a free webinar, is there, Chris? So I mentioned Chris has got a new book, Perspectives. That's available from Garrett at the moment. So if you like Chris's work tonight, we encourage you to look at Perspectives and look at the world in a slightly different way. Chris has got some fantastic photography, and he's got some fantastic reflections in that book. Our friends at ATF Press are releasing, I think, on the 1st of July or thereabouts, the first biography on Leo. It's been translated from French. There will be book launches in Melbourne, Sydney, and Brisbane in Augustinian parishes. I think in Sydney, Peter, you're joining one of those launches.
Yes.
So we'll get the dates from our friends at ATF and ATF Press, and make those dates available to everybody who's registered tonight. So we get as many people along to ATF's events. Naturally enough, you can buy that book from Garrett. Please do. We appreciate all your support. But that, I think, is the 1st of July or thereabouts. So through July, those events will happen. And also, we've already got a wide range of books from Cardinal Robert, now Pope Leo, available through Garrett. We are currently working with some American publishers who, not surprisingly, have a long list of new books about to be released before the end of the year on Pope Leo. I think, like everything America does, they do commerciality very well. So there's a range of books coming on Pope Leo, and give us an insight to us. So with that, I'm going to formally close the webinar. Thank you again to Chris, Peter, and Marc. By the way, sorry, one other thing I should mention is Marc mentioned the Helder Camara lecture series, and I tell you what, the most awesome book is on its way, Marc. Fantastic, celebrating 40 years of the Helder Camara lecture series. That'll be available in July. And so Marc and a number of people in my team have been, and the author Julie, have been working on that book for a year, and it's coming together, and it's fantastic. And what a wonderful gift to the church Marc has done with those lecture series over so many years. So congratulations, Marc. We look forward to the book. So with that, I'll close off. I nearly forgot, Marc. I would have hated to.
No, but Helder Camara was Latin American, and Francis was a Latin American, and the new Pope he's the second American to be elected. Yes, not Latin American, but he's the second American.
Well, he's got Peruvian citizenship, and they claim him as their own, which is the greatest compliment of all.
Well, to some extent, I mean, everybody says he's the first American Pope, and yes, by birth he is, but he's
first North American Pope, but not the second American.
But in all honesty, he's universally with his experience as the head of the Augustinians and his time in Peru and Rome. He's a universal character, but it doesn't hurt that some of the right-wing Americans might be a little bit put off. So anyway, on that comment, thank you very much, everybody, for joining us. Thank you to our panelists. I hope you have a wonderful evening and a blessed week. We look forward to seeing you again on the next Garrett webinar in coming weeks. Thank you very much, everybody.